In a certain city, there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that city, there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, "Grant me justice against my opponents. Grant me justice against my opponent." Now, this is a potent parable these days because two messages rise naturally from it, two related messages. One of those has to do with constant, unceasing prayer. And in this materialistic world, prayer isn't very popular. And the other message has to do with justice, which, in this materialistic world, is often under siege. Prayer and justice together. Now, for those of us living today, it actually may come off as a bit of an unusual combination because prayer and its sister discipline, meditation, are about lifting our hearts, raising our eyes, looking toward the ultimate, toward the greater goals that may seem less than achievable, or at least impractical. In fact, the goals of prayer are sometimes described or dismissed with the word, or words, I never am quite sure, the word otherworldly. Otherworldly. Because in this world, as we plan or campaign or vote for our vision of a just society and our place in it, in this world we are expected to compromise, mostly, to aim for achievable goals, rather than to dream the big dreams, or to pray for the commonwealth of heaven or the reign of God. And that is why I love this parable. I actually think about it a lot. I was like, have I preached this sermon? Have I just written the same one again? This parable gives us nowhere to hide. It creates a confrontation between the ideals of our hearts on one hand and the so-called practical world on the other. Between the ideals of our hearts and the practical world. So in this story, this woman, she goes to the unjust judge and says, "Grant me justice against my opponent." But the judge is busy. Too busy, in fact, with schemes of his own. And he puts her off. He waves her away. Why should he, a great and powerful politician, take any time away from the important people to hear the concerns of a woman who has been wronged, possibly by somebody just as unjust as he is? But in the story, she comes back, doesn't she? She came back and back and back again. "Grant me justice," she said. She persisted in her action, sustained by faith. And in the end, she won after a long time and many trials. Now we know, because the Bible tells us, the parable, Jesus tells us, we know that the unjust judge wasn't actually won over to her side. We know people like that today, don't we? The scales didn't fall from his eyes. Instead, the unjust judge did the right thing because he was forced to. Her activity made him acknowledge the legitimacy of her case. Her activism made him acknowledge that legitimacy, as well as her right to bring that case. That is, he had to recognize her humanity and the humanity of those she represented. Now, it's important at this point because people do make this mistake. It is important to recognize that the unjust judge is not a stand-in for God. The unjust judge is not a stand-in for God. While the image of billions of people petitioning a grumpy Judeo-Christian Islamic deity is compelling to some and entertaining to others, in fact, the unjust judge is the opposite of divinity. Or at least that's what he's manifesting. It's in his name, right? He's judging, and he's unjust. God, on the other hand, is love. God is love, which is the point Jesus is making here. The unjust judge is a power in this world, not in God's world, which is important to remember for prayer. According to pastor and theologian Reverend Cynthia Hale, we do not have to beg God for anything. God is more likely to bless us than we are to ask. God is more likely to bless us than we are to ask. However, these days when Jesus tells us that God will quickly grant justice, it doesn't feel like that, does it? It doesn't feel like that. Because we live in a world of unjust judges. We live in a world of unjust judges. So we cannot stop fighting. We can't stop demanding justice. The unjust judge will only concede just enough to make us go away. So the question for us is, how do we persist? How do we persist in the face of injustice? How do we keep ourselves on that road when there are so many ways to step off? How do we live into God's love while confronting the draining power that injustice brings? Well, first, we remember this parable. We remember this woman who Jesus holds up as holy and righteous, and who reminds us that this perpetual bothering of the powerful, is part of our walk of faith. And then we also remember that we need to be persistent, not just in the public arena, but in the spiritual one. Because the walk of faith is a prayerful walk with rewards of its own. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor by day, Stoic philosopher by night, tells us that when our inner spirit is in harmony with nature, capital N nature, it can adapt easily to all events and possibilities. When our inner spirit is in harmony with nature, it can adapt easily to all events and possibilities. For this spirit, he says, does not need any special matter or substance to function. So it's a good thing that Jesus is also telling us a parable about prayer. For prayer and meditation, that intentional connection to the divine that puts us in harmony with creation, prayer is what sustains us when we are weary, when we are sick at heart, and when the struggle has gotten us down. Prayer keeps us marching on. Now, this parable is all about that woman. She puts in the effort to gain the reward. She has the clarity of vision that comes from within. She comes from a place of praying without ceasing. Badgering, if you will. bother. Now, this continuous prayer sounds like something monks and nuns do, doesn't it? Going about their days praying the hours while trying to get some practical work done between devotions. But really, continuous prayer is about attitude. Continuous prayer is an attitude, and one that we can cultivate ourselves. You don't have to be an ascetic. In the Celtic Christian tradition, there's a saying: to go to Rome, which is to say, to the seat of power, to go to Rome is much of trouble, little of profit. The king whom we seek there, interesting choice of words, the king whom we seek there, unless you bring him with you, you will not find. To go to Rome is much of trouble, little of profit. The king whom we seek there, unless you bring him with you, you will not find. Esther de Waal, a current Celtic scholar, puts it this way: I shall not find Christ at the end of the journey unless he accompanies me on the way. That means continuous, persistent prayer. That means a particular attitude. The Celts would see in this persistent woman in our story today, they would see a fellow traveler, someone who moves through this imperfect world, but sees the perfect one, just peeking around the edges, just waiting to be revealed or unwrapped through our own holy and collective effort. Now, in one of the first churches I served, we recited the same covenant in church, in worship, every week. And it began, love is the doctrine of this church, the quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. Service is its prayer. Justice and prayer are inextricably linked in this way. If we wish to seek and be sustained by a greater vision, then we are compelled to work toward that vision, to immerse ourselves in it, giving of ourselves and receiving from others at the same time. Now, prayerful service, continuous, persistent, prayerful service requires something from us. And it's something that I know we've talked about, and that's humility. We must pray in this attitude of humility. Lest we be like that unjust judge, doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, he says, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice so that she may not wear me out. Instead, we need to pray humbly, seeking our shared connection, setting aside what we sometimes see as our own ample qualifications, giving up any privileged place we might hold to walk with all the other strangers as equals, as fellow travelers on the path of life. The activist Reverend Marjorie Bowens-Wheatley once noted that if we join spirits, the pain of our aloneness will be lessened. In the Spirit, she said, we build community and restoration. In the Spirit, we build community and restoration. And we do build community and restoration, or at least we can. Because this prayerful humility leads also to prayerful empathy, to seeing someone else's suffering. Maybe not understanding it entirely, but understanding its validity in a way that the unjust judge never will. Empathy keeps us from wallowing in our own pain or focusing on the barriers we have personally overcome. Instead, we can look back on our own trials and use them to better understand and experience the trials of others. The The Reverend Michael Eric Dyson addresses this in his powerful book on racism entitled Tears We Cannot Stop. Has anyone read that book? Tears We Cannot Stop? It's a good book. You're missing out. The whole book is actually formatted like a worship service. That is, like an extended prayer. And he tells us that empathy must be cultivated. Do not tell us how we should act if we were you, he says. Imagine how you would act if you were us. It sounds simple, he concludes, but its benefits are profound. Empathy must be cultivated as a prayer, because we are on a prayer-filled journey in a world where so many people cry out for justice. So let us find ways to make a practice, not of judging, nor of fixing things for others, but instead of seeing ourselves on the same continuous prayerful journey with all the other beings, exploring this thing called life and crying out for justice together. Amen.